Hello, wonderful people. I'm Dane Peterson from Wonderbot Animals. And here is Fisherman reels in a massive beast and is forced to think quickly. Before we begin, make sure to smash the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos. Ask most fishermen, and they'll tell you their favorite pastime isn't so much about catching fish as it is about relaxing in the calm waters. But every so often, fishermen can see a lot of action, and the setting can turn from serene to intense fast. One summer, Captain Ben Chansey found himself with something on the end of his line that probably made him wish he was on solid ground. When you see what he pulled from the water, you'll agree, he definitely needed a bigger boat. Catching a fish in the ocean isn't nearly as simple as movies or television might make it look. Fish are a whole lot bigger when you're out at sea, and they're more than willing to put up a fight. A boat captain named Ben Chansey learned that firsthand when he was fishing on the open ocean last summer. It was a sunny summer morning. Ben and a few of his friends wanted to make use of the great weather, so they hopped in their boats and headed out to sea. Once they were far enough away from shore, Ben jumped into a flotation device and grabbed his fishing rod. Ben bobbed up and down in the water for several minutes with his fishing line submerged. This particular area was teeming with fish. Ben and his friends had caught some decent-sized fishes there in the past. This time around, Ben suddenly felt a hard pull in his line. That was when his flotation device was actually dragged by whatever had snagged the other end. Ben was no stranger to a good open sea tug-of-war. He was ready to fight. Ben held on tight as the creature twisted this way and that, pulling the small raft back and forth. For a brief moment, he was nervous that he was going to fall overboard, but he maintained his concentration and continued to hold steady. What was this thing? Ben's friend, who was filming the ordeal, panned the camera down to the surface of the water to see if they could determine what the mystery creature was. It was clear something big was lurking down there, but the ripples made it impossible to see clearly. Even Ben wasn't quite sure what it was, and he was floating mere feet above it. The fishing line was still snagged on it, so Ben knew he had a chance to bring it to the surface. Whatever this thing was, it was extremely heavy. Ben just hoped it wasn't dangerous. With all of his might, Ben yanked on the end of his fishing rod. To the shock of all his friends who were watching, Ben pulled the creature close enough to the surface of the water that it started splashing about like a maniac. After 15 brutal minutes of going back and forth with the animal, it finally seemed to be giving in to Ben's tenacity. Ben's rod stopped moving erratically, and the captain slowly brought the mystery beast to the surface. It was a huge Goliath grouper. The exasperated Ben reeled the equally exhausted fish over to his raft and let out a cheer of victory. In this battle of man versus beast, man had clearly come out on top. While it surely took a great amount of courage for Ben to fight such a monstrous fish from such a tiny raft just a few hundred miles west, a man named George Saber was doing battle with his own monster of the deep. The catch in question took place just off the coast of Corpus Christi, where George was out for a day of fishing on the open ocean. Unlike Ben with his raft, however, George opted to make a kayak his vessel of choice on that fateful day. For George, the fish bit almost immediately. Within the first few minutes, he pulled a number of fish out of the water. He even caught sight of a large turtle as it swam by. The ocean definitely appeared to be quite active this late afternoon. After catching several large bait fish, George cast out some live bait as he drifted back to shore. With a flick of his wrist, George sent his largest piece of bait out into the murky depths of the water surrounding him. The bait swam around unbothered for a time until George felt a sharp tug at his line. Judging by the feel of the rod, George believed he hooked a stingray, nothing he could keep, but a catch nonetheless. He slowly reeled the creature toward his kayak. Bringing the fish closer to his boat, George realized that he hadn't hooked a stingray after all. He had caught a small shark, but before he could bring the little guy on board, George knew he had to wear him out first. Once the shark was good and tired, George lifted him on board so he could take a few pictures with him, given that the shark was so small. George felt that he could hardly pose much danger. After all, what harm could this little guy really do? Well, as soon as the shark hit the kayak, things took a turn for the worse. The shark thrashed violently and flipped itself toward its captor. Before George could react, the shark lunged at him, nearly taking a chunk out of his feet. The shark gnashed its teeth as it wriggled closer and closer to George, chomping wildly on his seat before deciding that the harsh plastic wasn't worth the bite. But before the shark could make a meal out of his captor, George quickly flipped him back into the water. With his fingers and toes intact, George pulled the shark into the boat one last time. After nabbing the perfect picture, George tossed the shark back into the water, putting an end to what could have been a disastrous day. While Ben and George received the toothy scare of their lives, thankfully the shark was just a little guy. They were safe and sound, those threatening fangs never touching their vulnerable skin. Unfortunately for Cali guy James White, his beastly encounter saw a little more bloodshed. Rohnert Park, California resident James White has a knack for fishing, at least he thought he did. But all that changed when what was supposed to be an easy day of casting off in the Pacific proved to be much more hair-raising. James settled into a spot by the shore at Bodega Bay, an area not far from San Francisco that appeared to be tame and quiet. As he expected, the morning started out slow, but then he felt a tug on his line. Grasping his fishing rod firmly in his hand, James felt that long-awaited pull, but strangely, it was more aggressive than usual. It was so vigorous, in fact, that the burly fisherman struggled to reel in the catch. White told NBC Bay Area that this went on for a staggering 10 minutes. "The only way I think I was able to get the line back is because it was swimming towards me," James said of the encounter. While James pulled with all his might, he caught a glimpse of the aquatic creature as it got closer to the shallows. Still yanking on his sturdy fishing rod, the wire taut, James' eyes widened with utter shock. The fisherman was hauling in a 6-foot-long 7-gill shark. Cue the Jaws music. Clearly not having been in the best headspace, James tried removing the hook from the shark's mouth. It didn't go well. Reacting impulsively to James' approach, the predator immediately sunk his teeth into James' bare, vulnerable ankle. The water soon turned a crimson hue, and James was beyond scared. He could tell the shark had done serious damage. See, the teeth in their 7-gill sharks' upper jaws are sharp and jagged, which they use to hold on to prey. No doubt James felt a good number of them sinking into his leg and refusing to let go. The first bite punctured an artery, he told NBC Bay Area. The pressure was intense. In that moment, a panicked James desperately cried out for help, hoping a nearby fisherman would come to his rescue. No person heard him. However, James White is the owner of a then 1-year-old, 100-pound pit bull named Darby. The dog loves James very much, and he'd do anything to protect him, even if that means facing off against a giant ocean predator. And while James was gone fishing, the silver and white doggo was left to relax in the nearby car. Darby hung out of the open windows and contently watched from afar until he heard a distressed James yell for help. He sprang into action. Once he reached James and the shark, Darby's initial instinct was to bite the shark's gills. That only made the enormous toothy fish angrier, and it gnawed deeper into James' damaged ankle. His blood continued to flood the water. When James realized Darby's well-intended interference was only making things worse, he scolded him, having told him to back off. This didn't stop the pooch, though, as he knew his beloved James was in trouble. Darby had a plan B. Darby repositioned and grabbed it by the tail. He literally ran up the hill with it and pulled it off my leg, the traumatized California resident explained to NBC Bay Area. James then flung the shark back into the Pacific. After the incident, James felt closer to sweet Darby, who fully embraced the heavy title of man's best friend. James told reporters he's been a part of the family from day one. Just now, a little more. He absolutely could have been a lot worse off, especially considering 7-gill sharks can weigh up to 230 pounds and reach roughly 10 feet in length. James was lucky. Too lucky, in fact, if you asked people who heard his story. Because while James could barely believe the insanity that just occurred, neither could anyone else. No, really, people were suspicious of James' extraordinary tale of shark versus dog. The whole thing sounded fishy. The first time I told somebody this, they were like, "You're out of your mind. There's no way that happened," James White said of his friend's literal disbelief. When James showed off his gnarly battle scars and photographic evidence, however, said friend was stunned. We're sure the shark attack survivor wore a proud smirk following his pal's shocked expression. James' bond with Darby is forever solidified. Thanks to the mighty pit bull hero, James White still has 2 legs. After all, encounters with deadly sea predators are nothing short of pure terror.